This is the Fantasy Football Unlimited podcast with your host, Kevin Murray.
Welcome to the Fantasy Football Unlimited podcast. On this episode, we have a special guest from Football Guys and the Auction Brief. It's the fantasy football lawyer himself, Drew Davenport. Welcome to the show, my friend.
How's it going? Thanks for having me, man.
Hey, it's a pleasure to have you on here. I can't wait to dive in, share your story a little bit, talk a little bit of auction draft because, auctions, it's a hot topic. It's something that you are passionate about. So we'll dive in. You're obviously the man with the legal breakdowns when it comes to, NFL players in hot water. You're also, again, passionate about the auction style fantasy football draft. For those unaware of your work, can you give a little rundown of what you're doing with Football Guys and what you got going on at the Auction Brief?
Yeah. So over at Football Guys, I'm doing their salary cap content. So auction or salary cap, we use that phrase at Football Guys, but of course it's interchangeable there. So I'm running their auction content over there. And then, I have my own show, the Auction Brief, where I break down both legal stuff and fantasy stuff and auction stuff. We kind of hit it all. So, and then I've got my Patreon network too. So for some more in-depth stuff for those people who are really hardcore into the auction stuff and want a little bit of legal insight that is not available on Twitter.
There you go. Let's take a stroll back. Let's talk a little bit about where your passion for sports originated. Were you a big sports fan growing up? Who were your favorite players? Talk to me.
Yeah, my dad was a big sports fan and just would watch anything. And I heard something that has stuck with me when I was younger. I was listening to Colin Cowherd, and he said, as guys get older, they tend to pare down their sports tree. And I thought that was a great statement because it's absolutely true. When I was younger, I watched everything. I mean, everything. I would, from the time I was little to the time I was really in my mid-20s, it was anything that was on. So I loved football was my favorite, but it was anything that was on. So as I've gotten older, though, I've really had to pare that down, with 3 jobs and 2 little kids and all that stuff. I am just really a college basketball guy and a football guy. But so, yeah, growing up, I was a Steelers fan. I was in the late 70s, of course, when I was growing up is when they were winning their 4 Super Bowls. So I know we have more than that now, but the 4 Super Bowls in the late 70s and early 80s, they were good. And I know that it's a foreign concept for us today, but we didn't have the ability to get all these out-of-market games. And you only saw what the networks fed to you, and they were feeding you the Steelers in the late 70s. And that's how it came to be. So growing up, hardcore, Stallworth and Swan were my guys, Bradshaw. And then as I got a little bit older, it morphed into Hines Ward, Troy Polamalu, Ben Roethlisberger, that kind of thing.
Love it. Yeah, I can relate to that too. Growing up, it's true. You love everything when it comes to sports. If sports gets you hooked, you're in on everything. And it's true. You do kind of pare things down over time. You only have so much time and so much energy to give. So I can see how that goes. So who's your college basketball squad?
So I went to Indiana. So I'm a Hoosier.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. And so I actually came by it honestly. My older brother went to IU. So another influence in the family there. I ended up following him to IU. He graduated in a year before I ended up at IU. So long line of Hoosiers there.
So Bobby Knight was a special person in your life, huh?
He was, and he was especially because his heyday was when I was not heyday, but his, I guess his downfall was when I was there.
Yeah.
Because he was starting to have all the trouble when I was there, and right after I left, the year after I left, he was when he got fired. So, but Bobby's an icon. I know there are people out there who don't like him. I understand why people don't like him. There's a lot of validity to that, but yes, he is an icon in my life and Hoosier Nation.
Love it. So as a sports fan, what's the biggest loss you ever experienced? I tell you one thing for me is the Seahawks losing to the Steelers when the Steelers and the refs took that Super Bowl from me. That was a big one for me, but it wasn't my biggest one. But what's yours? What's the biggest loss you've ever experienced as a sports fan?
Well, I think that it's got to be the Steelers Super Bowl against the Cowboys. That I was in college then. The Neil O'Donnell throw the ball right to Larry Brown.
Yeah.
That's carved into my memory. That's got to be it. It's got to be the Steelers loss in the Super Bowl there.
What's your favorite all-time sports moment?
That's an easy one. As a Hoosier fan, it's weird because we didn't end up winning the title, but I was just out of law school, or not? Just out of law school, and the Hoosiers had Mike Davis following up Bob Knight there, and we were a 5 seed, not really expected to do a whole lot, but we had a bunch of scrappy, gritty guys with a couple of top level players. We ended up making a run to the Final Four, and I remember going back to Bloomington because I still had buddies there and hanging out, thinking, okay, we're playing this juggernaut. I think it was Oklahoma in the Final Four. None of us expected to win, so of course we just went down to party, and we're just drinking all day, and then the game comes on, and not really taking it that seriously, and we win. And everybody in all the bars in Bloomington, bars, dorms, houses, emptied out onto Kirkwood Avenue there in the middle of Bloomington. And it was, I'll never forget it. And I've been waiting for them to get back to a Final Four since then, because I'm going back. I don't care how old I am, and I'm going to do the same thing and head down to Kirkwood Avenue with everyone.
I love that. I know it's something special about the NCAA tournament, obviously, and kind of getting caught up in the wave of the excitement. That's with a run like that. So that's cool. I love that.
Getting chills just thinking about it.
Yeah, no, that's cool. One day it's gonna happen.
It'll happen
you're gonna
again,
get back there.
right?
You're gonna reminisce all those memories. I love that. So you obviously you've been a defense attorney for 20 plus years. When did you decide that you wanted a career as a lawyer?
I tell you what, that is a really hard question. Let me try to distill it down to 20 seconds. I loved studying the law when I was in college because I took a couple classes that were just sort of law adjacent, like torts and stuff like that. I guess that's not law adjacent, but criminal law adjacent. And that stuff was interesting to me, but I didn't love it that much. But it really came down to, at the end of my college career, I was a major in philosophy with a minor in the philosophy of religion. And I thought to myself, what am I going to do with these degrees? And I firmly believe that philosophy just taught me how to think. So that was going to be good for anything, any career. But it's hard to get a job right out of law school with that on your resume, or right out of undergrad with that on your resume. So I thought it's either law school or it's maybe go into education and be a professor with this stuff. Well, I got to my senior year and I was in a couple 300 level philosophy classes. It was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And the universe kind of made that decision for me, because I said, I don't know that I can teach this to other people. I barely understand it myself. I decided law school was the way to go, and here we are.
I love it. So what have you enjoyed most about your career path?
Well, I'll tell you what, it's easy to get to this point in a career and be pretty jaded. I am myself. I've been doing this so long, and I've seen it. Well, I think I've seen it all every time I think that something new comes up. But I think the thing I have enjoyed the most is that I understand in what I'm doing, there's a huge impact on people's lives every single day. And it's easy to forget that when you sit down. I'll have a pretrial afternoon where I'll have 15 cases on the docket. It's all me, and they're all scheduled at the same time. And every single one of them shows up with a specific need or problem in their life that I can address. And that feels pretty darn good. And I will say that you tend to forget that, and you're like, hey, this is my work day. Yeah, I got you. Now get out of here. And you can get real like jaded like that. And being a public defender for as long as I have, there's not many people that continue this life that long. So I just have to tell myself that every day. When somebody walks through the door, there's a specific thing I can do for them that makes their life a little bit better. And that's what keeps me going.
That's good. I can see finding some joy in having that role to help people. It's always fulfilling to help people and help them get through something. So I can see there's some joy in that. But speaking of joy, there's no doubt you have some joy about fantasy football. When did you discover the game of fantasy sports and fantasy football?
That was actually in law school. I had a buddy who, still one of my best friends in the world, is he actually worked for a local TV station right when he got out of undergrad, because he thought that he wanted to be in journalism and broadcast. And of course, he's making like 17 grand to work for a sports station there. So he quit that, ended up in law school, became my best friend in law school, and he gave me the fantasy football addiction. He was a high level sports analyst, and I never knew that was really a thing. You see the talking heads on TV, but his analysis went to a different level. And I thought, well, this is really fun to think about sports this way. I've always thought about school this way. So then all of a sudden, all of my brain power that was previously being used on school went towards fantasy sports. And so it happened with the kind of weird, late 90s salary cap teams where if you picked a team and they did well that week, you got more cap and you got to buy better players, that kind of thing. So that was my introduction to it.
I love it. So, do you remember consuming content back then? Do you remember any brands or people, analysts that you followed?
Not really, no. So right out of the gate, it was just magazines back then. So when I got into the online salary cap stuff with my buddy, then I got invited to be in a local league that was an auction. So my first ever fantasy draft was an auction. And I just went to the store and bought a magazine. Excuse me. And took that to the draft. And I know that's a familiar story from the 90s, but in the early 2000s, I believe, when Football Guys made their debut, I began to be aware of them. And that's really, yeah,
Yeah, the
that
old Football Guys magazine. I love
that
it.
is old school stuff there. Yeah. And that's where I started. So I know that sounds self-serving because I'm a football guy now, but I promise that's the first place that I started to really get into hardcore fantasy football analysis.
I love it. So, what did you love most about the game initially? Like, what hooked you?
Well, I'll tell you what hooked me initially was the auction draft. And I know that that's unusual, but I really enjoyed the strategy of how you draft the teams and what availability of different options there were. And I know we're going to get to that stuff later, but that was so fun. And what happened to me, my first ever auction was, I tell the story every time somebody asks, but I love the story. I got David Boston, and I think I got him for like a couple bucks, maybe $6, something like that. And everybody was skeptical about him because he hadn't, had his breakout season yet. I'm reading a magazine like, oh, this David Boston guy, whatever. He ended up having like 1,500, 8 touchdowns. That was the pinnacle of his career. He never got back to that point. And I thought to myself, oh man, every year there's guys like that are cheap that are going to deliver these huge seasons. And that hooked me instantly.
I love it. It wasn't the biceps that hooked you.
Well, that was part of it. I mean, he just looked,
Yeah.
as a guy who knows nothing about fantasy football, and my previous information about football was just like, hey, that team's good this year. And that's literally where it stopped. When you open up a magazine, there's all this information. It's hard to process. And seeing David Boston, it doesn't hurt to see the guy before you draft him.
What a physical specimen for sure. So do you have one league that you consider your main home league?
Yeah, kind of two, but I do have one. Yeah, I run 2 home leagues, and they're my favorite leagues in the world. I run a keeper league. That's a weird format that is a story for another day, but it's a best ball with in-season management. And then my favorite home league is one that's about to be our 25th anniversary. We draft this year for the 24th time, and the Western Ohio League is taking a huge trip and having a whole week at the beach for a 25th party next summer.
Nice. I love that. Yeah. Any other special traditions that make that league special? I mean, obviously 25 years, you're gonna have a lot of history there.
Yeah, I do a lot of stuff for that league, and because it's clearly my baby. We have a cup that travels around, and the champion, of course, gets a drink out of the cup. It's a huge. I have it sitting over here somewhere. It's a huge pewter mug that's like half as big as my body, and of course, it's engraved with the champions on the outside, and so that travels around. But we also have a Hall of Fame, and I debuted that maybe about 10 years ago, and had different a point structure for how you earned your points every year, and that's been super fun. So it's hard to earn the points. It takes some longevity. You get points just for being in it for the year and setting a lineup all year and not screwing around. But then beyond that, it's hard to earn the points. So you really have to win a championship or win your division or make the playoffs consistently to get in. And it still takes about 10, 12 years to get into the Hall of Fame. And then we get jackets when we get in. And then, of course, you wear your jacket to the draft every year.
Oh man, this you can talk to me about this kind of stuff for an hour because
I'm sure.
that's my favorite stuff in the world. I love that so much, and there's something special about a league that's been around for a while and honoring the history of the league. We in our
Mhm.
league we have a goat, a league, goat that basically gets some special perks and whatnot, based on winning percentages and overall championships and that kind of stuff. And it's nice to kind of bring in some of that history, for us in our live draft. We got banners, championship banners, and I
Love
feel
it.
like it's just special to kind of acknowledge, what's happened in the past. It kind of gets people motivated, not just on the year ahead, but the legacy long term. So sounds like you're captivating all of that. I love it.
It's so much fun, and every year we go, I do a little something before the draft starts. So usually we have a trivia contest, and then you can win prizes from trivia before we start. And the trivia is all about like who paid attention last year. Were you on the website very much? Were you listening to people that trash talk? They were, So if people are really clued in, then they're going to win the trivia contest. They're going to win prizes. But also then I do like a little skit every year for the league. One year I came out. Do you know the rap battles from 8 Mile?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So one year I came out and I did the rap battles by myself about the league. And so that was pretty historical. That I think that Eminem will be back for the 25th anniversary party for another round.
I love it. I love that. So who's your biggest rival in fantasy leagues?
Well, I tell you what, it's got to be my brother. He started with me the very first year. He's the only one who is still left from the original league. Back then, we did a snake for the first couple of years, which is weird. I know. Don't tell anybody. But he's just he's a smart guy, and he goes about things a little bit differently than I do. So there's always that duality there of who's going to get over on the other. And we've had the championship title lead. We've been trading that back and forth. And so we both were at 2 for a long time. I got to 3 first a couple of years ago. Then he matched me last year with 3. And I won it this year to get to 4. So that's easily my rivals is my big brother, Mark.
I love it. You guys do a last place punishment, or is there any last place punishments out there that you love?
Yeah, we do a last place. We actually instituted this not long ago, maybe 6, 8 years ago. We had a sort of politically incorrect last place punishment that I will not go into. We've changed that a little bit. We've got a hat that you got to wear, and you have to basically be the butler for the champion during the draft. And then we have a little magnet that goes on the back of your car that says "I suck at fantasy football," and you got to wear that or put that on your car. And if we do a random check and it's not on your car, there's further punishment from there. So
I love it. I love it. Well, next time I see you in person, you got to tell me that that the
I
original
will.
one because
I
I need to
will.
hear about that one.
It's pretty
So,
good.
aside from auction drafts, are there certain settings, formats that you love in fantasy?
Well, I know that Superflex is getting popular, but I think this might be the old man in me, in that I'm not that into the Superflex. It's fine, and I play in plenty of Superflex leagues. I'm in 3 of them, I think, but I just that's not my thing. So I would say that my answer is an anti-answer. It's I like the traditional. So let's just say it that way. I'm still a fan of kickers and defenses. I think there's an edge. And I really believe that the move away from kickers and defenses, while it's completely fine, and I understand it, and there are leagues that I'm in that have that, I believe it's a little bit of laziness in people who just don't want to work it, because I think there's an advantage at kicker and defense. If you work hard enough and you pull the right teams or right players and right defenses off the wire, and you can work it throughout the season, there's an advantage there. And I think that's fun. So I think that's all part of the game. And I've never been real excited about doing away with the traditional stuff, and maybe that's the old man in me. Who knows?
I love it. I can respect that. Now, obviously, you do love your auction drafts. Let's talk a little bit about auction drafts. Talk to me about the equal opportunity that people get, by bidding on players instead of going through a snake draft, and how that levels the playing field in your opinion.
Yeah, I don't see anything that compares to it in fantasy. And I always say this to players who don't play auction and guys that I really respect. I remember having this conversation with Rich Rebar not long ago. And Rich and I have become pretty good friends. And I said to him, like, why isn't that more exciting to you? And he says, it is. Don't get me wrong. I like it. He said, I've never hooked into it like you did. And I can understand that. But I say the same thing to every guy or girl that is a smart person. And I say, hey, if you're good and you believe you have an advantage in fantasy football because of your knowledge or your analysis or your insight into the game, then you're getting a bigger advantage through an auction. So why wouldn't that be your natural progression as a fantasy player to want to get into auction? Because it enhances all of your strengths. Unless you're just a really like impulsive person who can't stop from yelling numbers out, then your intelligence and your knowledge is going to make you crush an auction. Wouldn't that be fun to you? But I try to make that point, and I understand people's reservations to it. But yeah, I just think that going into an auction and being able to know that I am going to get these types of players, that is the biggest thing for me, because I feel like in a snake, I get boxed in to certain players, and there's certain players I just don't want. And if I'm sitting there in the 7th round and there's a certain guy that's there and he should have been taken in the 5th round, I always feel the compulsion to take him. Like, oh, well, this is such great value. He slipped 2 rounds. I'll take him. That never works out, Kevin. I'm just telling you, man. Every time I do that, it never works out. And I can just stay away from those guys, period. In an auction, I don't have to worry about it. And I know that I'm going to get the guys I want. And it's a double-edged sword, because the years that I go in with certain players in mind and I really go for them and I'm heavy on those guys on my teams, I've had some really bad years because of some bad calls. But last year was one of those years where all my calls, I shouldn't say all, I had a lot of success last year with my calls and my big players that I liked, and I had a huge year. So you can't say that about Snake. Just because you're right about some guys, maybe you don't get those guys at all because the snake draft never allowed you to.
Yeah, that's right. Obviously, in auction, you can personalize your team and build that roster how you want to. Talk to me a little bit about that when it comes to the personalization and different strategies behind, how you construct your rosters.
Yeah, the Kings Classic every year in Canton with some of the best and brightest minds in the business. I think it's the most shining example of that, because you have to come up with a strategy that's going to be able to beat. It's a 14-team league, and I realized when we went to 14 teams that there isn't enough money to go around. And I know that sounds funny, but you literally cannot get a team without a hole in your roster. It just is going to happen. We play 3 flexes, no kicker, no D, and it is just a brutal setup. So I think that the strategy of being able to personalize your team is massive in those types of rooms. Whereas in a snake, it's kind of like, whatever falls to me, falls to me. But in an auction, that personalization is huge. And in recent years, I don't want to call myself a trendsetter. I'm not at all. But I will say that I've been saying for 4 or 5 years now that the way to do auctions is to go hard at the wide receiver and pass catching positions. And you can pretty much just blow off quarterback, even tight end sometimes if you need to, your second running back. So the personalization that I came up with 4 or 5 years ago is something I'm still using. And of course, we all know these days everyone's wide receiver crazy, but that's still the way that I believe you build the best auction team. And I love that fact that I'm not shoehorned into, oh no, I'm at the end of the first and the beginning of the second. These 2 stud running backs are here. I got to take them. I love that I'm not locked into that.
And it's obviously worked for you. You're was it 2-time champion of that Kings Classic division? Is that right?
Yes, sir. I did not bring it up for the praise, but I will accept it gratefully. Yeah, no, I went back to back in 2020 and 2021. And I'll say this, I say it all the time. There's a healthy amount of luck when it comes to a 14-teamer. And my best player stayed healthy those 2 years. And then I was able to plug and play and, work the wire at the other spots. But I tell the story all the time. It's a brief one, but I came out of the 2020 auction with the Kings Classic just despondent at my team, at how I could not build a full roster, because I'm not used to walking out of an auction and not having a banger of a roster. Like, I feel like in 95% of the rooms, I'm just going to crush it. And I came out of that draft with holes in my lineup, just despondent, like apologizing to people on Twitter. I'm so sorry that I'm an auction expert and this is the team I drafted and blah, blah, blah. I went on to win the league. And it's because I didn't realize everyone else had the same problems when we switched to the 3 flexes and the 14 teams. And so I, King's Classic's been a blessing for me, and I thank Bob Lunk for that.
I love it. Now talk to me about the other thing that makes auctions so special. It's like the live experience and a draft, like right. And talk to me about how much fun that is, the bidding process, the way that it can just create more engagement in a draft. Share some of that with me.
Yeah, well, I always tell people if I had to choose between a live auction or a online auction, obviously we're going to choose live. And if I had to choose between online auction or any form of snake, I'm just going to choose the auction anyway, even if it's online. But I think the most full, rich experience you get is in person with people bidding. And oh my gosh, it's so much fun. Now, I won't say don't do it if it's online, because I still think that's the better way to draft. And I think you made the correct point, which is the engagement, that you cannot get away from watching what's going on because every player is important. Whereas in a snake, you make your pick. You're like, all right, I got 15 minutes. I'm going to run to the bathroom, get a drink. I'll be back and I'll catch up. That's not how auctions work. And I love that you're constantly engaged. And that keeps my sort of scatterbrained. I don't want to call it ADD. I think that's a disservice to people that have it, but I do have a scatterbrain that doesn't calm down very well. And auctions engage that whole brain and force me to pour everything into that screen. And I love it. And being live, of course, is amazing because, it comes into like personal reads and stuff like that too. Because I've got guys I've been in the league with now for 15, 18 years in my home league. And I can tell when they're going to stop bidding. And I can tell when they want to play or when they're interested, because they do the same thing every year and they never switch up their game. So I think that's part of the game is just so exciting. Like, I know I can push this guy for $5 more because I can see what he's doing. I know he wants him and that kind of thing. There's nothing like that in a snake draft or in fantasy football anywhere.
And you need a good auctioneer too. You need someone, whether it's a member of the league that's doing it and knows what they're doing, or if you bring in somebody, which a lot of leagues do, which is just a whole other way to make a live draft fun. You need someone who knows how to work that system, because it's complex, it's dynamic, things are happening. If you're at the expo, you got to go witness one of these live auction drafts at the King's Classic, because it's truly special to see if you love fantasy football. And like you said, like the knowing people in the league and the way they go back and forth, it's a fun spectacle to be a part of. Obviously, if you can do it, highly recommend auction drafts, because like Drew says, it's if you really want to assemble the team that you want, auction is the best way to do it. You're not reliant on someone falling to you, or what draft position you're in. So
no doubt. I love it. Like you said, I want to put in a second vote. Come to the expo, folks. You don't have to work in the industry. Just come have fun with everybody. You'll meet people. Everybody's super friendly. All we're doing is sitting around having a couple beers and hanging out with everybody. I promise we're not talking late round sleepers. We just hang out and we talk. And then you can come to the Hall of Fame on Saturday and watch the live auctions. Guys like Howard Bender and Brad Evans and Mike Clay and Dave Richard and just all these guys auctioning. JJ Zachary's and Marcus Grant, all these guys are going to be doing a live auction in the Hall of Fame during that expo weekend. Please come out and watch. It's so much fun.
There you go. So obviously at some point you started creating content. What was it that inspired you to dive in?
Well, I have been thinking about it for a long time. And actually, I did a couple of guest articles for Football Guys in the mid 2000s, maybe 06, 07, 08 kind of time frame. And I've been thinking about it for a while. I used to write an article for my league every single week, breaking down what happened the past week, previewing the upcoming week. And people in my league would just say, oh, you need to get into writing. And I thought, well, how do you get into that? That's a really hard thing to say. I'm going to get into that. Well, Twitter turned out to be the vehicle that got me in, because those jobs are just not easy to find. And then when the world shrunk with social media, that's how I got hooked up with Joe Bryant, the head of Football Guys. And I actually put out a Twitter thread. I just signed up for a Twitter account, and I thought, oh, I'm just going to do this, and I've got a lot of thoughts about fantasy football. I'm just going to shoot them out into the internet and see what happens. So I called myself the fantasy football auction expert, started just spewing stuff about auctions, and then I thought, well, this Tyreek Hill case, I don't know if you remember that case with the phone call with the mother of his child, and that thing was wild to me because I knew from my experience in the law, the way he's talking to that woman, we have an abusive person on our hands. Remember, B, you should be scared of me too. That kind of like our child's scared of you, and he just didn't care. And I thought to myself, people are missing some stuff about this case. So I put out a Tyreek Hill thread, ended up going viral, and I always credit Matt Schaff from Draft Sharks for that because he picked it up and he went and retweeted it, and then it took off. And Joe noticed it and messaged me and said, hey, we need an auction guy. We need a legal guy. It seems to me that you qualify for both and would be a good fit. So that's how I got into it. And that was back in 2019.
Love it. Love it. So what do you love most about working with football guys and the incredible content that they produce each year?
So football guys has been my stalwart since the beginning. And I will say this, I believe that the Draft Dominator is the single best piece of software out there for auction drafts. And I think it's pretty darn good for snake drafts too. I mean, I think there's good software out there in general for snake drafts. But the software that they developed for an auction draft is the best in the business with the dynamic auction values. So when a player goes for too much, then the values in the rest of the field drop a little bit because you can get them for less because there's less money in the room. I love the dynamic auction values with the Dominator. But really, football guys, for me, has always had the things that I need quickly. And that means if I click on tools, I know that I can get to targets, snap share. I know that I can get to a player's page quickly and look at his game logs. So all of the stuff that I need is almost always right there at my fingertips with football guys. Now, some of the advanced metrics, we don't try to pretend that we're into that and that we're the best at that. So you have to go somewhere else if you want rush yards over expected and things like that. But for 95% of the needs I have, I'm on the football guys site. And I can't even stress enough that that's a really broad spectrum of things I need. And they're all there, depth charts, whatever you need, it's all there. And so I can't really pinpoint one thing other than to say the Draft Dominator for an auction is the best thing I've ever used. And I've been using it for, 20 years.
I love it. I love it. And not to mention some amazing people over there too, right?
Oh, and that's what you realize when you're on the base camp, where it's our internal water cooler because we're flung all over the country. You realize it's just a group of nice people, and you also realize that that's not something that just happens. Joe cultivates that culture through the things he says and how he acts, and what a nice person he is. And there's a slew of Bryants now working for football guys, and they're all just the nicest people in the world. So, his wife Barbie, that culture starts at the top. Guys like Sigmund Bloom. I mean, Sig, the first time I met him, he was getting off a plane in Vegas and he hopped in my car and we had the greatest conversation on the way to the hotel. And so all those people are just, not only are they approachable, down to earth, nice, but that culture, I think, also is why there's been so much success for football guys over the years.
For sure, for sure. Amazing people. And speaking of amazing people, this fantasy community is pretty special. What's your experience been like, connecting with people over the years, and talk to me a little bit more about the Fantasy Football Expo experience that you've had.
The Expo has been one of the best things to ever happen to me, bar none. And I don't mean in fantasy football, I mean in my life. And that is not, I'm not even exaggerating that, because when I got invited to go to the King's Classic, well, I didn't get invited. Football guys got invited, but they didn't have anybody to send because it was up in Canton, and they turned it down the first year. And then I came on board and they're like, hey, Bob's still asking us about this thing. I had no idea who Bob was. Why don't you go up there and do it? Well, I was like, okay, that's a lot of money for me to pay out of my own pocket to go up and do it, but let me check it out. Well, that was the best decision I ever made, because I get up there and I'm sitting across from Mike Tagliere, Marcus Grant, and sitting next to Darren Armani. And that was my introduction to meeting people in the industry, and they're just three super nice, down to earth guys. And I know I keep saying that, but I think that's the theme for the industry. Is I have not met very many people who are kind of like mean girls, like cliquish. Like it's not like that. You walk into a room, and it's like there's 60 people there that I've met before, and they're all my friends. And I've also made really close friends as well. Yeah, Chris Allen and Brian Drake and Ian Hartitz, and some of those guys are just I've made. Marcus, all those guys I talk to now, text with regularly, and that would not have happened without the Kings Classic back in 19, and of course the Expo exploding in the last couple of years. It's bar none my favorite weekend of the year.
What's your favorite event at the Expo?
Well, I got to pick my event first, but that's kind of cheating. So I think that the Kings Classic is the highlight of the weekend for me. Of course, I love the poker tournament that's started with Football Guys now because it's mine, but that's biased. I'd say the Kings Classic drafts are just it's the most challenging thing I do as a fantasy football participant. So that's a highlight for me.
And then, you have a lot of outside hobbies and interests outside of fantasy sports and your legal career.
I do.
We'll talk about like poker. Like you obviously you host the Football Guys poker tournament at the Expo.
Mhm.
I've been with you in Las Vegas. I've seen your affinity towards the casino, right? Like where did let's talk about that first. What's your favorite casino game, and where did your love for poker come from?
Well, I'm gonna do something here that is a little bit unusual, but people laugh at me when I say this, and I say I don't really like gambling that much. That sounds funny. I've had an open sportsbook betting account for 3 months, and I've made like 4 bets. Like I'm not any good at it, and I also don't like losing. Like so if I'm in a casino and I'm gonna play, my favorite thing is the social game of craps. I just love throwing the dice, and everybody's on the same team, so you're all around the table, and you're just scream and holler when you hit, and that's fun for me. But I don't like the losing, and losing is just a huge part of gambling. We know that, so I really just don't like it. And poker was the natural evolution of. I still like the gamble, and I love to engage my brain in solving a puzzle. Every hand is a puzzle, and I can solve that puzzle and be better than my opponent. And I don't have to fight the house. I can fight my opponent. And so poker's been a somewhat profitable, I guess, side job, you could call it now, since the early 2000s.
I love it. No, that's good perspective on the game too, on those kind of games. But yeah, I've seen some of that joy at the craps table. That's a lot of fun. Especially if you go into it with a mindset like that, right? You're looking for the entertainment, just having a good time. I
Yeah.
love that. You also you're passionate about surfing. Talk to me about where that came from.
Boy, have you got 2 hours? We no. So what happened was the short version is my best friend in the world lives in Hawaii. We were roommates in college, and he actually stiffed me after my sophomore year. We were roommates freshman and sophomore year, 2 of the best years of my life. He signed a lease with me to live with me my junior year, and we were going to be roommates again. And he calls me up halfway through the summer and says, I'm moving to San Diego. I said, okay, dude, I know you like surfing, but what the hell are you doing to me? And he was starting to get me into it at that point. He got surfing magazines delivered to our room, or we lived in a fraternity house, but delivered to the house, and he followed it. But back then you really couldn't get a lot of coverage of it. They weren't broadcasting surfing at that point. There was no medium to do that, and no network was going to put it on. So he was following it through whatever infant internet back then, and he got me hooked on it. He was a huge Kelly Slater fan, and Slater was winning all his world titles back then. And so then he moves away to San Diego, and it just grew from there. And honestly, the weird part is that my love of surfing grew with his because we were such good friends. So he's out in San Diego actually surfing and learning to surf, and he's getting me addicted to it. So then the invent of the live stream happens, and then you could start watching surfing and all these competitions from all around the world. Let me just say this, Kevin, because I could go on forever. But if you like sports, I've gotten some of these guys into it now. I've got a league now, and anybody's free to join if you want to hit me in the DMs. But guys like JC and Iggy and JJ Winter and some of these guys, they got into it just because they're friends with me and they're like, oh, I'll give it a try. They're addicted. And I'm telling you, if you like sports, there's nothing that rivals the end of a surfing heat. So you're coming down, you have a certain amount of time, you got 30 minutes usually on the clock, and it's the highest drama that you can have. The waves of consequence, where if you take off and you wipe out poorly, you could literally die. You have to have the courage to take off on these big waves, the skill to get it done, and then also the help from the ocean. So the amount of drama that involves life and death, and is a wave going to come? Is this person going to perform on the wave? The number of times I've seen a heat come down to the last 10 seconds and a bump pops up and somebody takes off and wins the heat with 10 seconds left, I can't even count. It's the highest drama that you could find in sports, bar none. And anybody that gets into it and starts doing fantasy surfing and starts watching the events gets addicted. I've never had anybody not get addicted to it. So I'm telling you, anybody that wants in, get in here. It's so much fun.
I love that. No, it sounds intriguing too. And yeah, there's such a beautiful sport and so much excitement. Like you said, those final moments, you got to get that right wave. I love that. That's exciting. Now, another thing, you mentioned Chris Allen, you mentioned Brian Drake. I know that there's a shared passion for beer with the three of you guys. What's your favorite beer? What's your favorite beer out there?
Oh gosh. I think it's got to be Chimay. So I'm not a beer. I'm not good at knowing what's good. So people tell me what's good and then I drink it. I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. So Chris and Brian know what they're doing. Okay. So Brian works for a distributor and he's gone through a couple different like alcohol sales jobs. So he really knows what he's doing. Loves his IPAs and loves like the kind of different stuff like the sours and this and stuff. I don't know anything about any of that. I just try it when he puts it in front of me. And same thing with Chris. Chris brews his own beer, and his beer is fantastic, and he really knows what he's doing. But again, I wouldn't know. I wouldn't be like, oh, this has chocolatey tones with like I don't know any of that crap. Like just put a good beer in front of me and say, Drew, this is good. So my buddies have told me about Chimay, and that's what I drink a lot of. And then it bothers them that I drink Chimay, and then I bring Natter Days, and then I start drinking Natter Days, and they're like, dude, how can you drink some of the best beer out there and then turn around and drink a Natter Day? But that's just how I am. I know what I like, and the Chimay tastes good, and so does a strawberry lemonade beer from Natural Light. So what do you want from me?
I love it. Let's dive into a few more rapid fire questions. I'll just throw out questions. First things that come to mind. Let me know. What do you enjoy most about what you're doing in the industry right now? Fantasy industry, not one of your other industries.
Okay. It's got to be the connection with the people. It absolutely. I love pushing out the content. I get excited for fantasy football this time of year, but it's got to be the people.
Love it. How about an all-time favorite TV show?
All-time favorite TV show. It's got to be The West Wing or The Newsroom, both Sorkin creations.
There you go. How about an all-time favorite movie?
Well, this was right in my wheelhouse. Top Gun is up there, but also The Godfather 1 and 2 are two of my favorites.
Yeah, that's great. What do you think? What do you think about Maverick?
I liked it. I think they hit all the notes. Yeah. I think that it tended to be cheesy at times, but when you're trying to hit all those notes, it's going to be hard not to be. But I had a blast watching that movie, and I've seen it 10 times. So
yeah, it was pretty good. Yeah, they nailed it, I think.
Yeah.
How about a favorite sports movie?
Hoosiers. Easy answer. Easy answer.
I knew that was coming. I knew
we're gonna run the picket fence at them.
What's your favorite vacation that you've ever been on?
Vacation, that's changed a little bit as I've gotten older. So I went to Hawaii twice to see my buddy, the one that was in San Diego, moved to Hawaii. So I've been out to see him twice and to see the Pipe Masters surfing, which is the Super Bowl of surfing. So those are up there. But honestly, that's changed the last 2 years. We took our kids to Disney World for the first time. We were supposed to go during COVID, didn't make it until May of 22. Best trip of my life was that first trip to Disney World, and then we went again in December, this past December, and that topped the previous one. So it's got to be Disney with my family at this point.
I love it. It's pretty magical. You can't beat it. Now, if you could live anywhere, where would it be?
Hawaii, no doubt. Yeah, no doubt. And we'd actually probably be there already. My wife said she's open, but we'd probably be there already. But my parents are getting up there in age, and their grandkids are some of their the biggest things in their life, and I'm not going to take their grandkids on a continental flight away from them. So,
But that's where you want to end up being, huh?
yeah, we'll be there. We'll be there
Nice,
someday.
nice. And there's a Scott Fishbowl live draft out there this year,
I
so
know.
you can always
I
hit
know.
that up when you're out
A
there.
little bit harder to get to the expo, but I'm hoping that when I get older, kids will be in college.
Yeah,
I'll be able to live out in Hawaii, still work in the industry, and get out to the Canton once a year.
sounds like a nice plan. I love it. Who's your favorite artist, band, or musician?
Easily right now, it's Manchester Orchestra, and it's been them for a long time. Not a lot of people know them. I understand it's a little bit of a niche band, but they're getting bigger. But they tour once or twice a year. I never miss a show. But more recently, too, we lost Jimmy Buffett, and he was one of my favorite guys ever as well. And that also comes from my buddy who got me addicted to surfing. He got me into Buffett, too. So it's Manchester Orchestra and Buffett.
There we go. What are you most grateful for at this time?
Well, I tell you what, I go to bed every night and thank God for how ridiculously good my life is. So I don't have one thing, but I would say that the health of my family in general, my parents, my brothers, and their whole families, we have been blessed with a lot of healthy, long lives. And then my kids, my kids are growing up to be they're kind of brats, which is my fault, but they're great kids who are healthy and do a lot of good in the world, and that makes me happy also. So I'd say just really just the health and happiness of my family. I'm so blessed to be able to do what I do, which is work in the fantasy industry while I have a 9 to 5 job. All of that is just, I'm just so lucky, and I don't know how I got this lucky, but I'm lucky.
That's wonderful. I love it. Now you mentioned kind of obviously having a career, diving into fantasy, contributing in the space. What advice do you have for people that are looking to kind of follow your path and get involved more in fantasy space?
Yeah, I say the same thing every time somebody asks me this question, and it's real simple for me. You have to create a schedule by which you're going to do your content, because it is real easy for me. And I tell you right now, just I'm a perfect example. I was going to start to try to get some episodes in the can, because I have a couple things coming up this summer where I'm not going to be able to get to my show during a given week. And I told myself, okay, in April and May, I'm going to get some of these things started. But I never set a schedule for myself, and never set a deadline. And here we are. I haven't done that yet. And that's human nature. So if you're trying to break into the industry, you cannot be inconsistent with your exposure. Now, that's fine from February to May, but from in June, July, and August and through the season, you have to be present in people's minds, which means having a schedule by which they can count on your content coming to them. Because you're trying to get people who want to listen to you, because I want to help people, but I also want to monetize it a little bit, right? I mean, I'm not killing myself 40 hours a week in fantasy football over the summer so that I can make $0. So it's a give and take. So if you're not putting the content out there on a specific schedule and keeping yourself to that schedule, then you're not going to make it. And once people see that you're pushing a certain thing and it's a quality product, then they'll be interested in you. But if they see, hey, this guy puts out a show every 3 weeks, or hey, this guy says he's going to have an article out on Tuesday and it drops on Friday, that's not somebody we can count on. You're not going to get sniffs that way.
Yeah, and I would add to that, knowing what your goal is, like what is your goal, right? Like
Right?
I
Yeah.
think that in your case, when you're saying, you want to have a good schedule, you also need to know what are you driving towards, right? I think that
Sure.
those kind of things fit together. Like you need to know why you're here, what you're doing, and if it is just contributing and having fun, well, the schedule can be a little more flexible, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. Great point. Got to have that
So,
goal in mind about what you want.
exactly. So can you name some of the people that have had a huge impact on you along the way?
Well, yeah, I've got to start with Joe. I mean, Joe plucked me out of nowhere. He plucked me out of the ether and gave me this opportunity. So Joe is the first person I got to mention. But the second person I have to mention is Brian Drake. I mean, Brian's just one of the nicest dudes I've ever met. And yeah, we talk trash on our texts and stuff like that about stuff and about, oh, this guy did this or this trade or whatever. But he's just one of the most genuine guys, and I would not be here without Brian, because his constant support of me, letting me talk to him about, hey, I have this idea. What do you think about this? And then the reason my show's even on the air is because of Brian and Steve Rappin, who gave me the platform to put my show out there when others didn't want it. And so, I'll never forget Brian for his support. But of course, Joe gave me the opportunity, and Brian's been a huge, huge reason why I am where I am.
I love that, because I asked Brian that several months ago, and he mentioned you, and definitely had a lot of praise for the friendship that you guys have developed, and that's something that we put back to the expo, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, it is. And we met the night of the first time I got there. I walked in the door, and Bob Harris was sitting there, and I was starstruck because I had been a Bob Harris guy for a long time. So I see Bob, and then I sit down, and there's this guy sitting there, and he's kind of awkward and nervous. I'm like, what's going on, man? I was too. I didn't know anybody. So we're sitting by ourselves. And I find out that he's going to be the auctioneer the next day. He's like, well, how do I do this? And I've been the auctioneer in my league. So I talked to him about how to do the auction stuff. And it went naturally from there. We have a lot in common in our backgrounds, which we didn't know at the time. But it was an obvious fit for a friendship there.
I love it, and that's the great thing about the expo. There's so many relationships, personal relationships, professional relationships that develop from the expo. So if you have an inkling to get out to the expo, you're curious. No one attends the expo and doesn't want to return the next year. I think that's what it comes down to, right?
100%. Nobody goes and has a bad time, I don't think. I saw once or twice somebody say like, oh, nobody talked to me, this or that, but I promise you that wasn't on purpose. This is not a cliquish group of people. It's just a lot of people having fun, playing cornhole, going to the stadium and listening to music. And it's just, if you go, you will not regret it. And if you're having a bad time, come find me, come find Kevin. We'll introduce you to some people. I guarantee you'll have a good time, and I'll buy you a beer.
There you go. And it kicks off at the Football Guys poker tournament at noon around there on Friday? Is it kind of where some of the first first unofficial event of the expo, I would say?
Yep. We start at noon at the M Bar in Canton, and bar's open, and we have food. And even if you're not playing in the poker tournament, now we still have about 30 seats left in the tournament, which will go fast here in June and July. So check that out. But even if you're not playing in the tournament, come hang out. Last year, Joe and Scott Fish and Mauricio and all those guys were there. It's $10 donation to charity, and you can eat pizza and wings and meatballs and talk to everybody and hang out, have a few drinks, and get the expo started off the right way.
There we go. Anything else we haven't covered before we close things out here?
I don't think so, man. I think we did a pretty darn good job here. I would say that the only thing I would stress is when I come back to, people ask me about surfing all the time, and I come back to the same thing about surfing, and I feel this way about the fantasy community. Part of what draws me to surfing is the type of people that are involved and the lifestyle that they lead and the attitudes that brings. So life is a little more relaxed, a little more laid back. Of course, it's competitive surfing, but it's one of those things where you realize that you're not just drawn to the sport, you're drawn to the essence of what it means to be a surfer or to be into surfing. And the fantasy community is the same way. I'm not just drawn to fantasy football. I'm drawn to the essence of the community and what I've found in the community since I've become involved. And that is the people that are there, the relationships, the connections. And I believe that we don't know everything about the universe, and there is definitely something about the magnetism of people and the energy that we give off when we're happy. And when you walk into the expo, the bar at the DoubleTree, or the party on Friday night, or the poker tournament, there is an energy that is positive, and you can feel it. It's palpable. And when you get some of that, it feeds your soul, and you want more. And that's why you got to be there. And that's the last thing I'd say is that that's the community, and that's what I love about it.
Beautiful words for sure. And it's true, rain or shine, the expo, like everybody's happy, right? Doesn't matter what's going on. It's a special time. So get to the expo, Canton, Ohio, every August from here until the end of time. As far as I'm concerned, it's going to be special. So can't wait to see you in Canton, my friend. Thank you so much for coming on this episode. Looking forward to seeing what you got in store for the fantasy community in 2024. Obviously, lots of legal stuff on the news. So make sure you're following Drew. Where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Drew Davenport FF. And then you can find my show, The Auction Brief, anywhere you find podcasts. My first episode of the summer will drop on Thursday with Marcus Grant. And then there's also my Patreon network. I don't try to push that too hard, but it's only a couple bucks a month. And I do a lot of auction and legal stuff on there as well. So thank you so much for having me, man. This has been a fun conversation. I appreciate it.
I love it, man. It was an honor to have you on here. I can't wait to see you in Canton, buddy.
You bet. I will be there.
Thank you for listening to the Fantasy Football Unlimited podcast. Until next time, be sure to follow and subscribe to all of FFU's social media accounts for daily content.